The Children's Institute at the University of Cape Town says 1 in 4 children in South Africa are stunted. It says child poverty plays a leading role in hampering early childhood development. The institute wants to see an increase in social grants for children. This Child Research and Policy Institute produces an annual report called the South African Child Gauge. This year, the focus was on early childhood development, or ECD. The report found that a lack of proper early childhood development has an impact on the brain of a child. A team of experts recommended that government increase social grants for children in line with the food poverty line. 2 years ago, it was found that more than 70% of young children were living below the poverty line. This year's Child Gauge report is expected to be published in August next year.
And when we talk about ECD, for most people they think about ECD centres and early learning programs. But what the gauge says is we need to be thinking much more comprehensively about child well-being, and we need to be intervening really, really early in the life and development of a child. So when we talk about early childhood development, we're talking about a whole package of services and support that should be in place from conception until the time a child enters formal schooling. That includes maternal and child health services, starting in the antenatal period, so care and support for pregnant women, because we know already that infant brain is developing in utero. So we need to get that foundation right, and then we need to continue that support all the way up to the beginning of formal school.
So here in the soup kitchen, we have got for the kids. After school, they are coming to teach. We work those smaller ones. From age of 5 years up until to 10 years, we are busy with those children, and above 10 years. And also elderly people, we are supporting them.
Us help these women who are running these programs to be able to take all the legal dumping spaces, allow people to have PTO, permission to occupy, because it's pointless you cleaning up a spot that's dirty, building whatever, and then the government coming to tell you you don't own this land, eradicate. Majority of the people in our townships that run ECDs for more than 20 years, run ECDs in shacks, run ECDs in flats, run ECDs in houses. That's not normal. So basic education needs to step in.
To unpack this report a bit more further for us, we're now joined by communication and education specialist at Children's Institute at the University of Cape Town and co-editor of the 2024 South African Child Gauge report. And her name is Laurie Lake. Laurie, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. Very important report that you have compiled. And of course, maybe if you can just begin by telling us about the findings of this report. Very important coming out is the issue around stunting of children.
Absolutely. This particular issue of the gauge focuses on the early development of children. And what we know is that young children need a range of different inputs. They need good health, they need adequate nutrition, they need safety, security, protection, responsive caregivers, so parents and family members who are really attuned and responsive to their needs, and stimulation. From the moment they're born, children are ready to learn, and their developing brains are shaped in very powerful ways by their immediate environment and relationships. So if we can build a strong foundation, if we can put in place meaningful support for the families and caregivers of young children, then we start to build a strong foundation for national development, because we know that what happens in these very early years, in a sense, shapes the health and educational development of children right the way through their lives and into adulthood.
And Laurie, one thing that you also point out to is the issue around, when it comes to development of children, it's important to start in pregnancy. Why is that so important?
So already in the antenatal period, the infant brain is developing. We know that maternal nutrition is really, really important in providing a strong foundation, both for the physical and cognitive development of children. And we know that we need to be doing more in the antenatal period. One of the recommendations coming through in the gauge is a proposal to introduce a maternity support grant. That would help improve nutrition of pregnant women, improve brain development in that antenatal period, and it would also relieve some of the stress that women face in those, I suppose, during pregnancy and then in the first weeks and months of caring for a newborn child. Another concern raised by the gauge is the very low uptake of the child support grant in that first year of life. And of course, again, we're really wanting to see good nutrition. We want you to make sure that families, mothers, caregivers feel supported, that they're not pushed to the limit. And we know that 7 in 10 young children are living below the poverty line. And that places huge strain on the family. It feeds conflict, it can breed violence, and all of those things compromise the development of young children. So in a sense, when we're talking about early childhood development, we're talking about investment early in the antenatal period and the first 2-3 years of life, and then of course all the way through to the early learning programs that you were talking about in the clip that you shared.
Yeah, and it seems as if there's a very important link here when it comes to stunting and the problems around poverty in our country. And perhaps maybe just outline that, how the two actually lead to the poor development of a child, the issue around poverty that also leads to stunting.
So we've already said that 7 in 10 young children are living below the upper bound poverty line. But what's more concerning is that 1 in 3 of our young children are living below the food poverty line. That means they're living in households that cannot afford to meet the nutritional needs of their children. And this is one of the reasons we feel that is underpinning the high, persistently high levels of stunting in our country. And when we talk about stunting, it is a sign of chronic malnutrition. In a sense, what you could call a slow violence of malnutrition that takes place slowly and gradually, almost invisibly, until the damage is done. And children who are stunted are not only short for age, it's not only compromising their physical growth and development, it's also impacting on their developing brains in ways that can make it difficult to learn. They're more likely to struggle as they move through school, and that in turn will compromise their ability to find employment, earn a decent income. And you start to see how what happens in these very, very early years of life starts to drive what we call an intergenerational cycle of malnutrition and poverty.
Is an increase in social grants right now the only answer to improving the development of children, especially children who are affected by poverty?
It's probably the single most effective intervention that we could ask government to champion at this time. When the child support grant was first introduced, it was meant to meet the nutritional needs of a child. Slowly over time, it's failed to keep pace with food price inflation. And now the value of the CSG is 530 Rand a month. That's roughly equivalent to sort of 15, maybe 16, 17 Rand per child per day. You can buy perhaps a loaf of bread, maybe a litre of milk. You can't buy both. So you start to see that families are faced with almost impossible choices when it comes to feeding their child a diet that is rich in nutrients. So what we saw, for example, during COVID is families were feeding their children starch and more starch. And they knew that wasn't necessarily the best thing for their child's health and development, but they couldn't afford. And the food poverty line sits at 760 Rand per person per month. So you can see that there's this significant gap which is why, in a sense, we are shortchanging our children. And it's not surprising that we're seeing these persistently high levels of stunting.
What is your advice, perhaps, to parents, who are faced, with stunting in their children, and they feel as if maybe there is some sort of difference that they can make, in the most immediate? What advice can you give them?
So one of the most important things is to try and provide children with a diverse diet. In fact, even before then, you want to start with a really solid foundation of breastfeeding, because that gives children a nutritionally balanced diet. And in fact, the composition of the breast milk changes day to day to meet the nutritional needs of the child. It's incredibly responsive, almost like a living form of food. And then once children start to switch to complementary foods, to solid foods, to try and provide as much dietary diversity as possible, to try and include proteins.
All right.
And that can include not just meats, but also beans and legumes.
All right.
So aiming for that diversity is really, really important in addressing stunting.
All right, thank you so much, Laurie, for that insight. Very important report there being conducted by the Children's Institute at the UCT or University of Cape Town. And Laurie Lake there giving us an insight in terms of what we can expect when that report is released.